Good evening, and welcome to Future Choices. My name is Fran Snedeker, and I am the producer and moderator of this educational series dealing with women's reproductive health issues, filmed at the LMC TV studios in Mamaroneck, New York. 5 years ago, I attended a very moving World AIDS Day ceremony at St. Bartholomew's Church in Manhattan. During that event, I fell into a conversation with a fascinating woman who had a wild and wonderful idea. As I recollect, she, an accomplished chemist, was about to go to Kenya all on her own to launch a project of setting up production facilities for Africans to manufacture their own antiretroviral drugs to combat HIV/AIDS, thereby reducing pharmaceutical costs and providing new sources of income for able medical professionals. I found her ideas fascinating, refreshing, astounding, maybe a little bit over the top. I've thought about her a lot since then, wondering what she ended up doing. So you can imagine my delight when last December, at a Planned Parenthood event in Westchester County, honoring Nita Lowy, I re-encountered her. I am thrilled to bring to Future Choices today Dr. Rolanda Hodel, who will bring us up to date on the amazing achievements that she's been able to do in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. Welcome to Future Choices, Rolanda.
Thank you so much.
Tell me, share with us, please, how you have been pursuing your special dream of AIDS-free Africa. What did you do after our meeting at St. Bart's 5 years ago?
That's a big question. It takes me back 5 years and all the work we did since then. But what I did right after this is I went to Kenya. Mm-hmm. I had been invited to an American lady who was married in Germany, living in Germany, mm-hmm. and she was running an orphanage in Kenya, in mm-hmm. the slums in Nakuru. Mm-hmm. Oh. So I met up with them, and it was incredible. In 4 weeks, I got a whole education on HIV/AIDS in Africa, which is really different. For example, the first thing that surprised me is that these women all came to me and said, "Doctor, our children are born HIV positive. What can you do?" And I was kind of confused because I knew from our country, children, the mother gets nevirapine and the baby is taken care of and everything is fine. So mm-hmm. I didn't have enough education about HIV/AIDS back then to even mm-hmm. understand their question. So I realized there is not even nevirapine available, which mm-hmm. is such a cheap AIDS drug preventing mother-child transmission of HIV/AIDS by birth. Mm-hmm. So, and since then I've been talking about all the other things, but especially mother-child transmission. And by now, 5 years later, the WHO, adopted guidelines to make sure that, on paper, to make sure that there's nevirapine available. But like all the other drugs that are missing, that's one of them.
Now you're telling me that you launched your efforts in Kenya and we're learning in the field about the challenges that HIV/AIDS presents to the African women, particularly, and their children. Yeah. Most of us, when we read about the challenges of HIV/AIDS, mm-hmm. we think, "Oh dear, that's awful." Then we turn the page mm-hmm. and read another mm-hmm. story, mm-hmm. Or we might write a very generous check mm-hmm. to help them. But most of us don't go to Africa to do something. What inspired you to get mm-hmm. so very mm-hmm. personally involved mm-hmm. in this kind mm-hmm. of project?
Mm-hmm. I am a chemist. In 2005, I got my doctorate from CUNY, City University in New York. I was at Queens College with Dr. Gaffney, wonderful professor. And I got my doctorate in chemistry, in nanotechnology. I could have gotten a big job, doing research and invent something brighter, lighter, cheaper, bigger, faster, But it really has only limited impact. I really wanted to do something with my life that had a bigger impact. And I was very fortunate that I represent the International Peace Organization at the United Nations. The organization is called SERVAS. And I was at a meeting at the UN just about at that time, listening to the Brazilian president, Lula da Silva, giving a keynote speech on how he, in the 90s, had broken, he had told his pharmaceutical industry to break all the patents to produce the AIDS drugs. And Brazil today is really the only developing country that has a handle on HIV/AIDS. So I was sitting in that meeting in 2003 already, thinking, that's cool. Let's do that in Africa. So by 2005, when I met you first, I was actually quite on that train already, but it was sort of all thinking. Kenya was really then the first real step to go in the field. I wanted to see it all and learn it, and I knew I had to learn a lot. That for some reason I knew.
And so your Kenya foray was just a learning trip. It wasn't the beginning of your work over there.
It was not set out for this. We in the afterwards we called this all needs assessments. But when I went there, I just went there because I was invited. I was invited for these 4 weeks in Kenya, and I was invited to go to Cameroon. So from Kenya, I flew direct to Cameroon.
One outside of the continent or the other?
Yeah, just across the continent. And I'm very glad, to this day, I'm so glad I had this Kenyan experience, because, like a lot of Americans, we sort of think of Africa as one homogeneous big country. It is a continent. It has 53 countries. It is very diverse. Even within the country, there are rich people, there are poor people, there are educated people, there are everything. It's like, the United States, we are not all the same. So being in Kenya, it taught me a lot how it could also go differently. In Kenya, up to this day even, I have good friends now in Kenya because of this trip from 5 years ago, no question, right? But still, it was not that people would go, oh yeah, they didn't pull this idea towards them saying, yes, we want this. In Cameroon, they did.
Which idea?
The idea to come and have us work together, us from the US, from AIDSfreeAFRICA, the organization, and the locals, the Africans, because our model of AIDSfreeAFRICA really is based on these companies being built and run by the Africans. They're owned and trained. We don't want to build sort of like a white-face factory, and then if I want to go home, everything falls apart. We want the Africans, they need to own it. It needs to be theirs. So in Cameroon, people were saying, yes, doctor, we want this. We'll connect you to this person. We find you this person. We find you this. There was a very different culture of hands-on, yes. So actually, we started out in Bamenda. Bamenda is a town, there are 5 large cities in Cameroon. Cameroon has about 20 million people today. The capital is Yaoundé. Douala is the big industrial city with almost 2 million people. Then there's Bafoussam, Bamenda, and a few bigger ones. But Bamenda is a big city with at least 300,000 people.
And is the HIV/AIDS problem more acute there for various reasons, or?
There is one thing that is that the English-speaking part of Cameroon is worse off in terms of HIV/AIDS. The numbers are higher. But I have to say, I'm always asked that. Cameroon is not one of the worst affected countries in terms of HIV/AIDS. It's not Botswana, it's not like South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, which are really the top 4. But in going to Cameroon, we also thought, if we go into a country where people are really desperate, how safe would it be for us to produce the drugs and even transport them to the hospitals? How much would we get robbed, or how much would there be break-ins into the factory? So being in Cameroon, a country that is moderately affected,